10 years had passed since the day the barriers went up, and everything changed for humanity. What the aliens expected to see was chaos, fighting, and the slow destruction of human civilization. Instead, something completely different was happening in each isolated human settlement. On Titan Station, a mining colony orbiting Saturn, Sam Cooper was solving problems that nobody had ever solved before. Sam was a 32-year-old engineer with red hair and freckles who had always been good at fixing things. Before the isolation, he had worked on simple mining equipment and followed the standard procedures that came from Earth. Now Sam had no choice but to think of new ways to do everything. The mining colony needed food, water, air, and power to survive, but they could not get supplies from Earth anymore. Sam had to figure out how to make their small colony completely self-sufficient. The breakthrough came when Sam realized that he could combine mining techniques with farming and manufacturing in ways that had never been tried before. He used the colony's mining robots to dig special underground chambers. Then he filled these chambers with soil and water and created artificial sunlight using the colony's power systems. But Sam did not stop there. He discovered that the waste heat from the mining operations could be used to warm the underground farms. The water used for cleaning the mining equipment could be recycled to water the plants. Even the carbon dioxide that the colonists breathed out could be pumped into the farm areas to help the plants grow better. Within 3 years, Titan Station was producing more food than it needed. The colony was also manufacturing its own tools, equipment, and even computer parts using materials they mined from Saturn's moons. Sam had created a closed-loop system where nothing was wasted and everything served multiple purposes. The most amazing part was that the mining operation itself had become much more efficient. By thinking about the colony as one connected system, instead of separate parts, Sam had increased their mineral production by 400% while using less energy than before. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was making her own incredible discoveries on the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. Amy was 29 years old, with black hair and brown eyes, and had always been passionate about physics and mathematics. Before the isolation, she had worked as part of a large research team that followed strict rules about how experiments should be conducted. Now Amy was free to try ideas that the academic establishment on Earth would have rejected as too risky or too unusual. Without access to the latest research papers from Earth, Amy had to rely on her own observations and her own theories about how the universe worked. The research station had been studying the energy barriers that surrounded them, trying to find some weakness or flaw that might allow them to escape. Amy spent months analyzing the quantum signatures of the barrier energy and discovered something that changed everything she thought she knew about physics. The barriers were not just blocking their ships and communications. They were actually bending space and time in ways that created completely new possibilities for energy manipulation. Amy realized that the aliens had accidentally created a laboratory where the normal rules of physics worked differently. She began conducting experiments that would have been impossible under normal conditions. By studying how the barrier energy interacted with different materials, Amy discovered that certain quantum frequencies could pass through the barriers without being detected. More importantly, she found that these frequencies could carry information. Amy spent 2 years building a quantum communication device that could send messages through the barriers. The device was unlike anything that had ever been built before because it used principles that only worked inside the strange physics environment created by the alien barriers. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew had turned their exploration ship into something that the ship's original designers never imagined. Jake's ship, the New Horizon, was stuck in the Kepler 442 system with no way to return to Earth. But they were not just sitting around waiting to be rescued. Ben Parker, the chief science officer, was a 26-year-old genius with blonde hair and blue eyes who had always been interested in new forms of space travel. Ben realized that while their faster-than-light engines did not work outside the barrier, they might be able to develop new propulsion systems that worked within the barrier's unique energy environment. Ben's team spent years studying how the barrier affected different types of energy and matter. They discovered that the barrier did not block everything equally. Some types of electromagnetic radiation could move freely, while others were completely stopped. Some materials became stronger inside the barrier, while others became weaker. Using this knowledge, Ben designed a new type of engine that actually used the barrier's own energy as fuel. The engine could propel their ship faster than any human vessel had ever traveled before, but only within the confines of their isolated system. They could explore every planet and moon in Kepler 442 in a matter of days instead of months. The crew of the New Horizon used their new mobility to conduct the most detailed exploration of a solar system in human history. They found resources and phenomena that gave them insights into astronomy, geology, and physics that no human had ever possessed before. Back on the Mars defense platform, Commander Lisa Grant was discovering that isolation had made her military unit stronger and more unified than any human military force had ever been before. With no external threats to worry about and no orders coming from Earth, Lisa was free to train her people in completely new ways. Lisa realized that traditional military thinking was based on fighting wars between different human nations or defending against unknown alien threats. But their current situation required different skills entirely. They needed to learn how to survive as a small, isolated community while maintaining their military readiness and their hope for the future. Lisa developed new training programs that combined military discipline with scientific research, engineering, projects, and even artistic activities. Her soldiers learned to be warriors, scientists, builders, and teachers all at the same time. The Mars defense platform became a place where military precision met creative innovation. The most important change was that Lisa's people stopped thinking of themselves as soldiers serving a distant government on Earth. Instead, they became protectors and leaders of their own small civilization on Mars. This change in thinking made them more motivated and more willing to take on difficult challenges. All across the galaxy, similar transformations were happening in every isolated human settlement. Mining colonies were becoming self-sufficient manufacturing centers. Research stations were making breakthrough discoveries. Military units were becoming more cohesive and innovative. Even small trading posts were developing new technologies and new ways of organizing their communities. The Zephyrian observers who were monitoring the human settlements were becoming increasingly confused by what they saw. Their predictions had been based on the assumption that humans were naturally violent and chaotic. They expected the isolated communities to fall apart within a few years as people fought over limited resources and blamed each other for their situation. Instead, the humans seemed to be thriving in ways that defied all logical expectations. Crime rates in the isolated settlements had dropped to almost zero. People were working together more effectively than they had when they were connected to the larger human civilization. Most surprising of all, the humans were developing new technologies at a pace that seemed impossible for such small, isolated groups. High Arbitrator Vexthal reviewed the monitoring reports with growing unease. The plan was supposed to weaken humanity by dividing them and forcing them to face their problems without the resources of their entire species. Instead, each isolated group was becoming more capable and more advanced than they had been before. The barriers were created. But Vexthal convinced himself that these were just temporary improvements. Humans were naturally destructive and chaotic. Sooner or later, their true nature would reassert itself and they would destroy themselves, just as the Alien Council had predicted. The barriers were holding perfectly, and the humans were still trapped. The plan was still working. What Vexthal did not know was that Dr. Amy Rodriguez had just successfully sent the first quantum message through the barriers. Her message was simple, but it would change everything. "This is Proxima Station calling any human receiver. We have found a way to communicate through the barriers. Please respond if you receive this message." The isolation was about to end, and, when it did, the aliens would face a humanity that had been transformed by the very punishment that was supposed to destroy them. Amy Rodriguez stared at her quantum communication device with excitement and disbelief. After 3 years of failed experiments and countless sleepless nights, she had finally received a response to her message. The reply came from Titan Station, and it was exactly what she had hoped to hear. "Proxima Station, this is Sam Cooper on Titan Station. Your message received clearly. We are ready to share information." Within hours of that first successful contact, Amy's communication network was connecting isolated human settlements across the galaxy. Each group that joined the network brought their own discoveries and innovations to share with everyone else. What had started as a desperate attempt to break through the alien barriers had become something much more powerful, a secret network that linked all of humanity's scattered communities. The first major information exchange happened between Amy's research station and Sam's mining colony. Amy shared her discoveries about quantum physics and the unusual properties of the barrier energy. Sam shared his innovations in closed-loop manufacturing and resource management. When they combined their knowledge, both communities were able to make improvements that neither could have achieved alone. Amy realized that Sam's manufacturing techniques could be used to build better quantum communication devices. Sam discovered that Amy's quantum principles could be applied to make his mining operations even more efficient. This was just the beginning of what would become the greatest sharing of human knowledge in history. Captain Jake Morrison and his science officer Ben Parker were among the first to join the network. Ben's discoveries about barrier-compatible propulsion systems were revolutionary, but when he shared them with other scientists in the network, they became even more impressive. Dr. Susan Lee, a physicist trapped on a research station near Alpha Centauri, showed Ben how to modify his engines to work with different types of barrier energy. The result was a new propulsion system that could work in any barrier-enclosed space. Within months, every isolated human settlement that had access to the necessary materials was building their own versions of Ben's engines. For the first time since the barriers had been created, humans could travel quickly within their assigned areas. But the most important development came when Commander Lisa Grant joined the network. Lisa had been developing new organizational systems and training methods for her military unit on Mars. When she shared these ideas with the other isolated communities, they realized that Lisa had solved one of their biggest challenges: how to maintain order and motivation in small isolated groups. Lisa's leadership techniques were quickly adopted by communities throughout the network. Her methods for combining military discipline with scientific research and creative problem-solving helped every settlement become more efficient and more unified. More importantly, Lisa's ideas about community identity and purpose gave isolated humans a new sense of hope and direction. The network grew rapidly as more settlements made contact with each other. Each new community brought fresh ideas and different perspectives to the growing collection of human knowledge. Mining colonies shared resource extraction techniques. Research stations compared their scientific discoveries. Military units exchanged security and organizational strategies. Even small trading posts contributed valuable insights about logistics and supply management. What emerged from this exchange was something that surprised everyone involved, including the humans themselves. The isolation had not weakened humanity as the aliens had intended. Instead, it had created dozens of specialized research and development centers, each focused on solving specific problems, but all working toward the same goal: survival and eventual freedom. Sam Cooper's mining colony had become the galaxy's most advanced manufacturing center, capable of producing complex technologies using only local resources. Amy Rodriguez's research station had unlocked secrets of physics that had previously been impossible to discover. Ben Parker and Jake Morrison's exploration ship had developed space travel methods that worked better than anything humans had built before the barriers. Lisa Grant's Mars defense platform had evolved into something far beyond a simple military base. It had become a training center for a new type of human leader, people who could combine military effectiveness with scientific innovation and community organization. Lisa's people were still soldiers, but they were also engineers, scientists, teachers, and planners. The most remarkable discovery came when the network tried to map all of their technological advances together. Each isolated community had been forced to solve different problems using different approaches, but when they shared their solutions, patterns began to emerge that nobody had expected. Every human settlement had developed technologies that complemented the discoveries made by other settlements. Sam's manufacturing systems worked perfectly with Ben's propulsion designs. Amy's quantum techniques enhanced Lisa's communication and coordination methods. It was as if the isolation had unconsciously directed each community to focus on different pieces of a much larger puzzle. Dr. Patricia Wong, a systems analyst trapped on a research station orbiting Jupiter, was the first to recognize what was happening. Patricia was 31 years old with long black hair and glasses, and she had always been good at seeing patterns in complex data. When she analyzed all the technological advances shared through the network, she made a discovery that changed everything. The humans were not just developing random new technologies. They were unconsciously creating the components of a completely integrated technological system that was far more advanced than anything humanity had possessed before the barriers were created. Each isolated community had been working on a different part of the same ultimate solution: freedom from the alien barriers. Patricia's analysis showed that if all the human innovations were combined properly, they would have the theoretical capability to not just break through the barriers but to completely neutralize them. The manufacturing techniques, propulsion systems, quantum physics discoveries, and organizational methods could work together to create a coordinated escape plan. But Patricia's discovery revealed something even more important. The combined human settlements now possessed technological capabilities that exceeded those of the aliens who had trapped them. The barriers that were supposed to keep humans contained had instead become the catalyst for humanity's greatest technological revolution. The news of Patricia's analysis spread through the network quickly and caused great excitement in every settlement. For the first time since the barriers had been created, humans had real hope that they could not only escape their imprisonment, but also ensure that such a thing could never happen to them again. However, the network participants quickly realized that they faced a serious challenge. They had the knowledge and the technology needed to break free, but they did not have the resources or the coordination necessary to implement a galaxy-wide escape plan. Each settlement was still limited to its own local materials and its own small population. Amy Rodriguez proposed a solution that would require unprecedented cooperation between all the isolated communities. Instead of trying to break out individually, they should coordinate their efforts to create a simultaneous breakthrough that would overwhelm the alien monitoring systems and make it impossible for the barriers to be re-established. The plan would require perfect timing and complete trust between communities that had been isolated from each other for over 20 years. Every settlement would need to contribute specific resources and technologies while following a coordinated timeline that allowed no room for error or delay. Lisa Grant took the lead in organizing the coordination aspects of the plan. Her experience in military planning and her leadership training methods made her the natural choice to manage the complex logistics of a galaxy-wide operation. Lisa developed communication protocols and coordination systems that could function, even if parts of the network were discovered by the aliens. The preparation phase would take several more years, but the humans now had something they had not possessed since the barriers were first created: a unified purpose and a realistic plan for achieving their freedom. Every isolated community began working toward the same goal, sharing resources and knowledge in ways that made them collectively stronger than they had ever been as a connected civilization. The Zephyrian monitors were beginning to detect unusual energy patterns from some human settlements, but they could not interpret what they were seeing. The quantum communication network was designed to be undetectable by alien technology, and the humans were careful to disguise their most important activities as routine maintenance and research. High Arbitrator Vexithal received reports of strange readings from the human settlements, but his scientific advisors assured him that the barriers remained intact and unbreachable. The humans were still isolated and still trapped. Whatever they were doing inside their barriers could not possibly threaten the security of the Galactic Alliance. Vexithal was about to learn that he had seriously underestimated the species he had tried to contain. The barriers that were supposed to be humanity's prison were about to become the launching pad for humanity's emergence as the galaxy's dominant technological power. The morning started like any other morning for Captain Jake Morrison. He sat in his chair on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the stars move slowly past the big window. His crew was busy checking their equipment and running tests on the ship's systems. They had been traveling through space for 6 months now, and everything was working perfectly. Jake was 35 years old and had been flying ships for almost 15 years. He had brown hair and green eyes and always kept his uniform clean and neat. His crew trusted him because he never made big mistakes and always kept them safe during their long trips between the stars. The New Horizon was not a military ship. It was built for exploring new places in space and finding planets where humans might be able to live someday. Jake and his crew of 20 people had discovered 3 new planets in the past 2 years. None of them were perfect for humans, but they all had something useful like rare metals or clean water. Today they were supposed to check out a solar system called Kepler 442. The scientists back on Earth thought there might be a planet there that could support human life. Jake was excited about this mission because finding a new home for humans would be the biggest discovery of his career. Lisa Grant was having a normal day too. She worked as a commander at the Mars Defense Platform, which was a huge space station that protected the human colonies on Mars. Lisa was 28 years old with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was smart and tough, and all the soldiers under her command respected her leadership. The Mars Defense Platform had been built 20 years ago when humans first started living on Mars permanently. It had powerful weapons and strong shields, and could protect the Red Planet from any enemy attack. Lisa had been working there for 5 years, and nothing dangerous had ever happened during her time as commander. She was in the main control room checking the daily reports when something strange appeared on her screens. All the communication, signals from other human colonies were getting weaker and weaker. At first, Lisa thought it might just be a technical problem with their equipment. Far away from both Jake and Lisa, in a place where humans had never been, something very important was happening. The Zephyrian Council was meeting in their great hall on their home planet. The Zephyrians looked like tall, thin creatures with blue skin and 4 arms. They had big eyes that could see many different colors, and they were much older than humans, as a species. High Arbitrator Vexthal stood at the front of the Great Hall addressing the other members of the council. He was the leader of not just the Zephyrians, but of a group of 12 different alien species that had joined together. All of these alien species were worried about the same thing: humans. Vexthal spoke in a deep voice that echoed through the hall. For 300 years we have watched the humans spread across our galaxy like a disease. They are violent and unpredictable. They fight wars with each other, and they take resources from planets without asking permission. They do not respect the natural order that we have maintained for thousands of years. The other aliens in the hall made sounds of agreement. There were creatures that looked like giant insects, others that appeared to be made of living crystal, and some that seemed to be pure energy floating in special containers. Despite their different appearances, they all shared the same fear of humanity. Today we will solve the human problem forever, Vexthal continued. We have spent decades building a special technology that will trap each human settlement in its own invisible prison. They will not be able to talk to each other or travel between their colonies. They will be forced to live in isolation until they learn to be peaceful. The plan was called Operation Silence, and it was the most complex military action ever attempted by the Alien Alliance. They had secretly placed special devices near every human colony, space station, and ship in the galaxy. When activated, these devices would create energy barriers that would completely cut off each human settlement from all the others. Back on the New Horizon, Jake noticed something odd happening to his navigation equipment. The stars outside seemed to be moving in ways that did not make sense. His science officer, a young woman named Amy Rodriguez, called out from her station. "Captain, we're reading some very strange energy patterns. It looks like some kind of field is forming around our ship." Jake frowned and walked over to look at Amy's screens. The readings showed energy levels that were far beyond anything their ship could produce. "Where is this energy coming from? Are there any other ships in this area?" Before Amy could answer, the entire bridge was filled with a bright blue light. Every screen and control panel flickered and went dark for a few seconds. When the lights came back on, everything looked normal again, but something felt different. Lisa was experiencing the same thing at the Mars Defense Platform. Bright lights flashed through the control room and all their equipment shut down briefly. When everything turned back on, Lisa immediately tried to contact Earth and the other human colonies. Nothing worked. Every communication channel was completely silent. Lisa tried different frequencies and different types of signals, but she could not reach anyone. It was as if every other human settlement in the galaxy had simply disappeared. Jake was having the same problem on his ship. Amy tried everything she could think of, but they could not contact Earth or any other human ships or colonies. Even worse, when Jake ordered his crew to change course and head back to Earth, they discovered that their faster-than-light engines would not work properly. Then, the message came. It appeared on every screen in every human settlement at exactly the same time. The image showed High Arbitrator Vexthal speaking in perfect English, which surprised everyone because no human had ever taught the aliens their language. "Humans of the galaxy," Vexthal said calmly, "you have been placed in isolation chambers for your own good and for the good of all other species. Each of your settlements is now surrounded by an energy barrier that cannot be broken from the inside. You cannot communicate with other humans and you cannot travel beyond your assigned area." Jake felt his heart racing as he listened to the alien's words. Around him, his crew members looked scared and confused. This was not supposed to happen. Humans were supposed to be safe in space. Vexthal continued speaking. "You have 30 standard years to prove that your species can live in peace. During this time, we will watch you carefully. If you can show us that humans are capable of existing without violence and chaos, we will consider allowing you to have limited space in designated areas of the galaxy. If you fail this test, the barriers will become permanent, and you will remain isolated forever." The message ended and every screen went back to normal. But nothing would ever be normal again for Jake, Lisa, or any other human in the galaxy. They were now prisoners in their own small sections of space, cut off from everyone they had ever known. What the aliens did not understand was that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They thought isolation would make humans weaker and more willing to give up. They were about to learn that humans became most dangerous when they had no choice but to adapt or die. The 28th year of isolation had arrived, and humanity was ready to emerge from their chrysalis. Every isolated settlement had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering resources, building equipment, and coordinating their actions, down to the precise second. What the Zephyrians had intended as punishment was about to become humanity's greatest triumph. Amy Rodriguez stood in her laboratory on the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, her hands moving over the controls of the most advanced quantum manipulation device ever built. The machine was 10 times larger and more powerful than her original communication equipment, built using designs that had been refined through years of collaboration with other human settlements across the galaxy. Amy was no longer the same young physicist who had been trapped by the barriers 28 years ago. Her black hair was now streaked with gray, and her brown eyes held the wisdom of someone who had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge further than anyone had ever imagined possible. The isolation had transformed her from a student of physics into its master. The quantum manipulation device hummed with barely contained energy as Amy made the final calibrations. Her calculations showed that she could create fractures in the barrier energy at precisely the right moments and locations to allow the coordinated breakout to succeed. But the timing had to be perfect, and the power levels had to be exactly right, or the entire plan would fail. Thousands of light years away on Titan Station, Sam Cooper was making his own final preparations. The mining colony had been converted into a massive power generation facility that could produce energy levels far beyond anything humans had ever achieved before. Sam's red hair had turned completely white during the years of isolation, but his mind had never been sharper or more focused. Sam's closed-loop manufacturing systems had been modified to create specialized energy storage devices that could hold and release tremendous amounts of power in precise bursts. These devices would provide the energy needed to widen the barrier fractures that Amy created, turning small cracks into openings large enough for ships to pass through. The most remarkable thing about Sam's power systems was that they used principles he had discovered by studying the barrier energy itself. The aliens had unknowingly provided humans with the key to their own imprisonment by creating barriers that could be analyzed and understood by human scientists and engineers. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching his crew make final preparations for their part in the breakout. Jake was now 53 years old, and his brown hair had turned gray, but his green eyes still held the determination and courage that had made him a successful exploration captain. His ship had been completely rebuilt using technologies developed during the isolation years. Ben Parker, now the chief engineer as well as science officer, had installed the most advanced propulsion and navigation systems ever created by humans. The New Horizon could move faster and more precisely than any ship in human history, and it could operate in energy environments that would destroy conventional vessels. But the New Horizon's most important modifications were the specialized conduits and energy transfer systems that Ben had designed. During the breakout, Jake's ship would serve as a mobile energy relay station, channeling power from multiple settlements and directing it to the exact locations where it was needed most. Commander Lisa Grant coordinated the entire operation from the Mars Defense Platform, which had become the command center for humanity's most complex military operation ever attempted. Lisa was now 48 years old, and her blonde hair had become silver, but her blue eyes still held the fierce intelligence and leadership ability that had made her indispensable to the human resistance. The Mars Defense Platform had been transformed into something far beyond its original military purpose. It was now a combination command center, communication hub, manufacturing facility, and training academy. Lisa's people had become the galaxy's most skilled coordinators and organizers, capable of managing complex operations across vast distances with perfect precision. Lisa's greatest achievement had been developing the coordination protocols that allowed dozens of isolated settlements to work together as a single unified force. Each community had its own role to play in the breakout, and every action had to be timed perfectly to support the actions of every other community. The breakout began at exactly the predetermined moment, simultaneously across every barrier in the galaxy. Amy Rodriguez activated her quantum manipulation device and began creating fractures in the energy fields that had imprisoned humanity for 28 years. The fractures appeared as tiny cracks of light that spread across the invisible barriers like lightning spreading across a dark sky. At the same moment, Sam Cooper's power generation systems activated and began feeding enormous amounts of energy to the barrier fractures. The tiny cracks began to widen and spread as Sam's energy storage devices released their accumulated power in precisely controlled bursts. The barriers that had seemed absolutely solid and unbreachable began to show signs of weakness for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Captain Morrison's ship moved into position and began channeling energy from multiple sources to the most critical barrier locations. Ben Parker's energy transfer systems worked flawlessly, directing power flows with mathematical precision to ensure that every barrier crack received exactly the right amount of energy at exactly the right time. All across the galaxy, other human settlements were playing their own crucial roles in the coordinated breakout. Mining colonies were providing raw materials and manufacturing capabilities. Research stations were monitoring energy levels and adjusting the breakout parameters in real time. Military units were preparing to defend the newly opened passages and coordinate the movement of human ships and personnel. The most impressive aspect of the breakout was how perfectly every element worked together. After 28 years of enforced isolation, humanity was demonstrating a level of coordination and cooperation that would have been impossible when they were freely connected to each other. The barriers had forced them to become more unified and more effective than they had ever been before. The Zephyrian monitoring stations detected the energy surges immediately, but their operators could not understand what they were seeing. The readings showed power levels that exceeded anything in their databases, and the energy patterns did not match any known technology from any species in the Galactic Alliance. High Arbitrator Vexthal was summoned to the main monitoring center on the Zephyrian homeworld. As he watched the displays showing energy readings from human settlements across the galaxy, his 4 arms trembled with a combination of confusion and growing fear. The barriers were supposed to be unbreachable, but something was clearly happening that the Zephyrian scientists could not explain. "What are we looking at?" Vexthal demanded, his deep voice echoing in the monitoring center. "Are the barriers failing? How is this possible?" The chief monitoring technician, a young Zephyrian with bright blue skin and wide frightened eyes, struggled to provide answers. "High Arbitrator, we are detecting coordinated energy surges from every human settlement simultaneously. The power levels are far beyond anything humans possessed before we created the barriers. We do not understand how they are generating such massive amounts of energy." Before Vexthal could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the monitoring center. The displays showed that the barriers were not just being attacked, they were being systematically dismantled by forces that the Zephyrian technology could not resist or counter. The first barrier to completely collapse was the one surrounding Amy Rodriguez's research station. As the energy field dissolved, the station's communication systems immediately began broadcasting a message that was picked up by Zephyrian receivers throughout the galaxy. "This is Dr. Amy Rodriguez of the Human Research Station Proxima Base." Amy's voice came through clearly on alien communication channels. "After 28 years of isolation, humanity has learned to work together in ways we never thought possible. We have developed technologies that surpass anything we possessed before you imprisoned us. We are no longer the chaotic and divided species that you tried to contain." More barriers collapsed in rapid succession as Sam Cooper's power systems and Jake Morrison's energy transfer networks continued their precisely coordinated work. Each barrier that fell released another isolated human community, and each community immediately began broadcasting messages to their newly freed neighbors. But the most shocking message came from Commander Lisa Grant on the Mars Defense Platform. Her transmission was directed not to other human settlements, but to the Zephyrian Command Center itself. "High Arbitrator Vexthal." Lisa's voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "This is Commander Lisa Grant, speaking on behalf of all human settlements in this galaxy. We are formally requesting immediate negotiations for a new arrangement between humanity and the Galactic Alliance. We believe it is in everyone's interest to establish peaceful relations before this situation escalates further." Vexthal stared at the communication display in complete disbelief. The humans were not declaring war or demanding revenge for their 28 years of imprisonment. Instead, they were offering to negotiate. The neutral meeting station appeared in space between Earth and the Zephyrian homeworld just 3 weeks after the barriers fell. The humans had built it using their new technologies and their new organizational methods, and its construction demonstrated capabilities that made even the most advanced alien civilizations nervous. The station was beautiful and functional in ways that defied conventional engineering principles. It used materials that seemed to bend light around them, creating surfaces that appeared solid but somehow transparent at the same time. The structure itself was constantly shifting and adapting, with sections that moved and reconfigured themselves according to the needs of the people inside. High Arbitrator Vexthal approached the station aboard his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, accompanied by representatives from all 12 species of the Galactic Alliance. As they drew closer to the human construction, Vexthal felt a growing sense of unease that he had never experienced before in his long career as leader of the Alliance. The human station was not just technologically impressive. It was completely different from anything any known species had ever built. It seemed to operate according to principles that the Alliance scientists could not understand or explain. More disturbing was the fact that the humans had built it so quickly and so perfectly, suggesting that their technological capabilities were far beyond what anyone had estimated. Inside the station, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the main conference room checking the final preparations for the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history. Jake was now 53 years old and had become one of humanity's primary ambassadors, but he still carried himself with the confidence and dignity of a starship captain. Jake had volunteered to be one of the human representatives because his experience during the isolation years had given him a unique perspective on what humanity had become. He had seen firsthand how the barriers had forced humans to develop new ways of thinking and working together. He understood better than most people how much his species had changed. Dr. Amy Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying the data tablets that contained humanity's proposals for the new galactic arrangement. Amy was now 47 years old and had become one of the galaxy's most respected physicists, but she remained humble about her achievements and focused on the practical challenges of creating a peaceful future. Amy's quantum communication discoveries had made the breakout possible, but more importantly, they had shown humanity that cooperation and shared knowledge could achieve things that individual brilliance could never accomplish. This lesson had become one of the core principles of the new human civilization. Sam Cooper arrived next, bringing with him the detailed plans for the resource sharing and manufacturing systems that would support the new galactic economy. Sam's red hair was now completely white, but his mind remained as sharp and innovative as ever. His experiences on Titan Station had taught him that scarcity and competition were not natural laws, but simply the results of poor planning and limited imagination. Sam's manufacturing innovations had proven that it was possible to create abundance rather than merely managing scarcity. His closed-loop systems could produce anything that was needed using only local resources and renewable energy. This technology could transform every civilization in the galaxy, but the humans were willing to share it freely rather than using it as a tool for dominance. Commander Lisa Grant was the last to arrive at the conference room, and her presence immediately brought a sense of order and purpose to the gathering. Lisa had become humanity's primary military and organizational leader, but she had also developed into something much more important, a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they worked together toward common goals. Lisa's leadership during the isolation years had proven that humans could maintain discipline and effectiveness without resorting to authoritarianism or violence. Her methods had created military units that were more loyal and more capable than any in human history, but they were also more creative and more compassionate than traditional military organizations. The alien delegation entered the conference room with obvious nervousness and uncertainty. High Arbitrator Vexthal led the group, his tall blue form moving with the careful dignity of someone who was trying to project authority while feeling completely out of his depth. Behind him came representatives of the other 11 Alliance species, each looking uncomfortable and confused. The aliens had expected to find the same chaotic and unpredictable humans they remembered from before the barriers were created. Instead, they found themselves facing people who radiated competence, confidence, and calm determination. These humans were clearly far more dangerous than their predecessors, but they were also offering peaceful cooperation instead of demanding revenge. Jake, Morrison stepped forward to address the alien delegation, speaking in a clear voice that carried throughout the conference room. High Arbitrator Vexthal, we welcome you and your representatives to this meeting. We hope that today we can begin a new chapter in the relationship between humanity and the other civilizations of this galaxy. Vexthal responded with the formal, diplomatic phrases that his species had used for thousands of years, but his words sounded hollow and outdated in the face of humanity's transformed presence. Captain Morrison, the Galactic Alliance appreciates your invitation to these negotiations. We are prepared to discuss the terms for humanity's reintegration into galactic civilization. Amy Rodriguez smiled gently and shook her head. High Arbitrator, I think there may be a misunderstanding about the purpose of these negotiations. We are not here to request reintegration into the existing galactic order. We are here to propose the creation of a new galactic order that will benefit all species, including humanity. The alien representatives stirred nervously as they began to understand the true scope of what the humans were proposing. This was not a plea for forgiveness or a request for limited autonomy. The humans were offering to completely restructure galactic civilization according to principles that they had developed during their 28 years of isolation. Sam Cooper activated a holographic display that showed the detailed plans for the new economic and resource management systems. The technologies we developed during our isolation can eliminate scarcity and competition between civilizations. Every species can have access to unlimited resources and unlimited opportunities for growth and development. We are offering to share these technologies freely with any civilization that wants to participate in the new system. Lisa Grant stepped forward to address the military and security concerns that she knew were troubling the alien representatives. The Galactic Alliance was created because you feared that humanity was too chaotic and violent to coexist peacefully with other species. We understand those fears because we once shared them ourselves, but we have learned that cooperation is more powerful than competition, and that shared prosperity is more secure than individual dominance. High Arbitrator Vexthal struggled to find words that could adequately respond to the human proposals. Everything the humans were suggesting contradicted the fundamental assumptions that had guided galactic civilization for thousands of years. The alliance was based on the principle that different species needed to be kept separate and controlled to prevent conflict. The humans were proposing that all species should work together as equals. What you are suggesting is impossible, Vexthal finally managed to say. Different species have different needs and different capabilities. Competition and hierarchy are natural laws that cannot be changed by technology or good intentions. Jake. Morrison responded with the patience of someone who had spent years learning to see beyond the limitations of conventional thinking. High Arbitrator, 28 years ago we would have agreed with you. We believed that scarcity and competition were inevitable aspects of existence, but our isolation forced us to discover that those beliefs were wrong. Amy Rodriguez activated another display that showed the energy readings and technological specifications from human settlements during the breakout. The barriers that you created to contain us became the laboratory where we learned to transcend the limitations that we had always accepted as natural laws. We discovered that cooperation multiplies capability rather than dividing it, and that shared knowledge grows stronger rather than weaker when it is freely distributed. The alien representatives studied the human data with growing amazement and fear. The technological capabilities displayed in the reports exceeded anything that any Alliance species possessed. But more disturbing was the realization that the humans had achieved these advances not through competition or conquest, but through cooperation and shared effort. Sam Cooper continued the explanation with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent decades solving problems that others thought were impossible. Every isolated human settlement developed different specializations and different approaches to survival. But when we connected our communities through the quantum communication network, we discovered that our different solutions complemented each other perfectly. We had unconsciously created the components of a technological and social system that was greater than the sum of its parts.